Hey guys, tonight we're taking a dreamy, drizzly stroll into the Cambodian jungle, where towering stone temples shimmer beneath the moonlight, and time itself may be leaking from forgotten fountains. You've probably heard of Angkor Wat, right? That impossibly symmetrical masterpiece lost among the banyans. Well, it's more than a postcard. It's a clock. Not one of those round, ticking things you ignore on a classroom wall. No, this one runs on lotus water, sunlight, and secrets buried for centuries, and you're about to walk right into it. Just a heads up, you probably won't survive this temple trek if you're hoping for breakneck action. This is a 3-hour stroll through some of the calmest, slowest, most oddly precise architecture ever made. But hey, that's kind of the point. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where you're all listening from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're here at the threshold of Angkor Wat. The air is warm, sticky, and humming with frogs you can't quite see. Vines curl lazily over the outer galleries, and the sandstone under your bare feet is still hot from the day's sun. The sky is going lavender now, dipping toward indigo, and those famous temple spires are catching the last glint of light like the spears of sleeping gods. The place is nearly empty, just a few birds swirling overhead and something slithering in the moat. You step carefully. The stones seem oddly watchful, as if they've been waiting centuries for you to pass by. You pause at a shallow pool reflecting the whole western facade. It's not just for looks. That pool, like many you'll see tonight, was probably part of an elaborate system designed to track time. Not for hours and minutes exactly, but for something older, weirder, cosmic time, ritual time, the kind of time that doesn't need batteries. See, when you build a temple in the middle of a monsoon-prone rainforest, you've got two problems: too much water and not enough time. But the Khmers, they turned water into their secret weapon. They dug canals, moats and reservoirs so precise that satellite images today still can't believe how symmetrical they are. Some of these reservoirs, called berets, are so big they look like inland seas from the air. But you're on the ground, walking beside one now, hearing the lapping water and watching fireflies blink like lazy stars. Here's a sleepy thought. What if that still pond you're peering into isn't just a mirror of the sky, but a reflection of a ticking mechanism? What if the water level was meant to rise and fall on cue, aligned with sunrises and solstices? Historians still argue whether these pools were designed as spiritual landscapes or functional timekeepers, or both. Some believe their shape mirrors the Hindu cosmos, Mount Meru at the centre, ringed by oceans. Others suggest they served practical calendrical roles, with seasonal water levels triggering ceremonies. Maybe it was just clever landscaping with bonus mystical vibes. Who knows? But it's fun to imagine ancient engineers staring at the same pool you're looking into now, counting not stars, but drops. You press on, deeper into the temple. The air is cooler here, shaded by giant carved corridors lined with bas-reliefs. Rows of dancers, warriors, and gods stretch endlessly on either side, their stone eyes fixed on eternity. One Apsara has a chipped foot. Another seems to smirk. You smile back. She's been here longer than any sundial, probably. Your fingers graze the warm stone as you pass. Every so often there's a little niche carved into the walls, just big enough to hold a bowl. Some archaeologists think these held oil lamps. Others think they were part of early timekeeping systems. Drip bowls. Fill them with water and poke a tiny hole. Count the drips. Measure the hours. A temple alarm clock, Khmer edition. Let's be honest, it wasn't exactly Swiss precision, but it worked. Probably. You step through a narrow doorway and emerge onto a high terrace. Below, the jungle swells in every direction, a sea of treetops whispering in the wind. Somewhere out there are other temples, Bayon Taprum Bantiai Srey, each its own little universe, each with its own method of telling time. Some use shadow markers, others tracked the moon. One supposedly used the gurgling of buried bamboo tubes, but that might be temple gossip. You crouch down by a carved ledge where moss grows thick. Beneath your hand, you feel a shallow groove, a channel. Another historian recently suggested that grooves like this may have directed rainfall into specific basins, not just for drainage, but to measure flow, sort of like a rainfall-activated stopwatch. Quirky fact, There's a theory that temple musicians and dancers were trained to perform rituals at exact intervals dictated by water clocks. So if the basin was full, the drumbeat began. If not, go take a nap. Suddenly a bat flutters overhead, shaking a few dewdrops loose from the ceiling. You feel one hit your arm. Maybe that's time passing too. You move slowly now, hearing only your own breath and the occasional call of a gecko somewhere in the rafters. The temple seems asleep but not dead, waiting, listening, measuring. And as you step through the final archway into a moonlit courtyard, you catch sight of something that stops you mid-step. A square pond, almost invisible in the darkness, still, perfect, reflecting nothing but stars. And deep inside it, just maybe, you see time itself ripple. The stone under your feet cools as the last of the day's heat gives way to the hush of evening. You stand at the edge of that mirror-like pond where not even the chirp of a frog dares to break the surface tension. But you notice something curious. The pond isn't centered. It's off to one side, just a little skewed from the temple's strict symmetry. It feels deliberate. And as you pace around the edge, you realize the pond, along with the surrounding walkways, doorways, and even the holes in the roof, might all be working together, like gears in a very, very slow-moving machine. You're beginning to suspect that the Khmer builders weren't just throwing rocks around and hoping for rain. They were engineers, and their obsession with water wasn't just about irrigation or avoiding floods. It was a way to mark the passage of time in a place that didn't have mechanical clocks or even hourglasses. You pass another long gallery, where one side opens to the sky and the other is flanked by carved pillars. As the moon rises, the shadows of the columns stretch diagonally across the floor, like the arms of a sundial that no one's touched in 900 years. You start to see it now. This entire structure, the pools and paths and pillars, is a giant mathematical model. A place where time is read through architecture and reflected through water. A temple that doubles as a calendar and a clock. Back in the day, the Khmer Empire didn't just toss up a temple and call it holy. Nope. They aligned everything. North-south, east-west. Spires pointed to cardinal directions. Doorways faced the solstices. And the biggest moats? They weren't just moats. They mirrored the heavens. Each temple was both a shrine and a snapshot of time, frozen in stone and moisture. Mainstream historians agree on this much. The temple complexes at Angkor were built not just for religious devotion, but as cosmological diagrams. They represented Mount Meru, the mythic center of the universe, and its surrounding seas. But here's where it gets slipperier than a frog on a wet lotus leaf. Some fringe researchers argue that parts of the water system also acted as astronomical calculators, that certain spillways filled only on specific lunar cycles, that the lotus pools weren't just for ambience, they were time-telling tools, sundials that bloomed, and sure, not everyone buys it. Historians still argue whether those water basins were timepieces, ritual baths, or really elaborate rice coolers. But let's keep walking. You duck into another hallway, and this one feels different. Shorter ceiling, closer walls. The scent of moss thickens and the air is cooler here. You feel like you've entered the temple's nervous system, a hidden channel just beneath the surface. Your fingers trace the grooves in the stone again, lines that twist and taper into carved spouts. Every so often, there's a subtle dip in the floor, just wide enough for pooling. No drain, just collection. If this were a modern building, you'd think bad plumbing. But the Khmer builders were famous for getting the water to do exactly what they wanted. So maybe this wasn't a floor, maybe it was a clock. Imagine a drip falling every few seconds into a bowl, slowly filling it until the weight causes a tilt, spilling the water out, starting again. Tick, tock, ancient hydromechanics. The idea may sound far-fetched, but similar devices existed in other ancient cultures, like China's clepsydra and Egyptian water clocks. And the Khmers? They were master adapters. They absorbed influences from India, from the Chinese courts, even from neighbours in Champa and Java. So it's not so wild to think they took the concept of a water clock and turned it into a temple-wide meditation on time. And now here you are, standing in the middle of it. You hear something shift behind you. A small clatter, maybe a gecko knocking loose a pebble, or maybe it's the temple adjusting, stretching, reminding you that even stone breathes over time. Out in the open again, you pause beneath one of those wide, triangular Khmer roofs. If you look up, you'll see small patterned holes near the top edge. Drainage? Probably. but some scholars think these tiny punctures let in beams of sunlight at precise angles, creating light paths that shifted with the time of day. A beam might land on a certain statue at noon, or highlight a relief of Vishnu exactly at equinox. Of course, weather wasn't always predictable. When monsoon season hit, the system could overflow. So did time just flood? Did rituals get delayed because the water clock short-circuited? Quirky fact: one old inscription actually blames a failed temple ceremony on the sleeping of the moon and the anger of the clouds. Translation: it rained too much, and the timing device, be it pond or drip or sunbeam, flopped. But don't worry, they still did the dance, probably just late. You chuckle to yourself, imagining an ancient temple priest frowning at a soggy lotus basin muttering, "We were supposed to start the offering at noon, but the water said 3 p.m. Up ahead, another pond glints under the moonlight. This one's rectangular, deeper, and lined with odd little platforms. You count them, 8 on one side, 8 on the other. 16. Not a random number. Lunar calendar, maybe. Days of a fortnight. There's a fringe theory that each platform was linked to a daily ritual step, paced out not by sand or gears, but by the changing depth of the water itself, as if priests waded out, noting the level, then decided which prayer to sing. It's poetic. A bit moist, but poetic. You sit on the edge of the stone now, your feet just hovering above the cool surface. Ripples shiver outward from a single drop, one you didn't hear fall, but it did. Somewhere deep inside this temple, time is still flowing. You stay seated by the water's edge for a moment longer, letting your toes flirt with the air just above the surface. Then you notice something you missed before. Floating lotus blossoms, evenly spaced like dots on a watch face. Coincidence? Maybe. Or maybe you're just getting better at spotting patterns that once meant everything to someone. You slip back into the corridors, and this time they open into a courtyard lined with 4 square ponds, one at each corner. The centre is dry stone like the ticking heart of some giant timepiece. You can practically hear the rhythm of water once pouring from spouts above, draining in carefully measured streams into those pools. One step closer, and you realise each pond is tiered, like a wedding cake, but made of stone and algae. Those steps down might have served more than just aesthetic flair. The theory? As water rose or fell along each tier, it marked time, a schedule carved into sediment. Rituals might begin once water hit the 3rd ledge, or end if it dropped below the 1st. You imagine a monk, barefoot and sleepy, padding into this very space long ago, peering into the nearest pond and thinking, "Ah, 3rd tier. Time for incense and chanting. Again." Historians still argue whether these pools were that exact, or just general-purpose water features that we're overthinking. But when every temple is built with such obsessive geometry, it's hard not to assume some purpose behind the design. And then there's the really fun idea that these lotus ponds weren't just clocks, they were calendars. Picture this: certain lotus flowers bloom only during specific seasons, some open at dawn, others at noon. So if you've got a mix of them planted in the right pond, you might have a living, floating schedule, nature's own planner. When the red ones open, light the candles. When the white ones wilt, pack up the offerings. Not exactly Apple Calendar, but arguably prettier. Of course, frogs probably messed it all up. Speaking of frogs, did you know the ancient Khmers sometimes used them in their timekeeping myths? There's a fringe legend that claims a sacred frog was kept near one temple's central basin. If it croaked at noon, it was said to be an omen of balance. If it stayed silent, well, time was off. Naturally, this could also just be the result of a sleepy frog. But when everything revolves around divine timing, even amphibians get dragged into the cosmology. You pass by a low-relief carving along the outer wall now, one that's easy to miss. But if you squint, you can make out a procession of attendants carrying bowls, some steaming, others pouring. The contents aren't labelled, obviously, but scholars have proposed these could represent ritual waters, gathered at specific moments from sacred springs or pools timed to particular stars. It makes sense. Water wasn't just symbolic, it was interactive. You touched it, tasted it, used it to bless or cleanse, but it also touched you back, reminding you how long you'd been sitting, waiting, or dreaming. Quirky fact: some local traditions suggest certain temple pools could only be filled at night. Why? Because under moonlight the water was cool-tempered and thus safe for sacred use. It sounds poetic, sure, but it also likely helped avoid algae bloom and insect breeding. Sacred logic meets science. As you move further in, you pass through one of the innermost gates, where the carvings get more intimate. Less grand battle scenes, more gods in repose lounging under canopies with what looks suspiciously like drip bowls. Yep, even the divine need to know what time lunch is. One particular carving of Brahma shows him holding a spoon over a bowl with concentric ripples carved beneath it. Some argue it's a symbolic offering, others see it as a visual metaphor for time, the spoon dropping water, the ripples marking hours. Is it a religious image or a user manual? Historians are still divided. Some say the symbols just repeat spiritual motifs. Others whisper that it's evidence the priests and architects encoded timekeeping systems into every relief and statue. A temple you could read like a giant stone instruction manual if only you knew how to speak its watery language. The sun, or rather the moon, has now climbed higher, casting silver bars across the ground through grated skylights. You pause in one such moonbeam and realize you've become part of the system. Your body, your movement, your shadow, all passing across temple surfaces that were designed to track such things. It's a strange sensation. You're not just in a temple. You are, for a moment, the hand of its clock. Somewhere to your left, water gurgles through a hidden chute. You follow it down a mossy set of steps to a small platform lined with crumbling pots. Some archaeologists believe these were part of a backup timekeeping system. Ceramic clepsydras that dripped through holes of different sizes to measure hours in case of sunless days. Others think they were just water filters, but imagine if they were time tools. A priest in charge of the ceramic hour watches as water trickles, waiting for the final drop to signal the start of a recitation. Miss the last drip, and you're out of sync with the gods. Oops. You reach a narrow bridge leading over a dry moat, where stepping stones once served dual purposes, crossing and perhaps measuring. It's said the spacing of the stones, alternating long and short, reflected lunar rhythms. A bit of a stretch. Maybe. But when you're an empire obsessed with timing the cosmos, even your bridge might moonlight as a metronome. The quiet is thicker now. Even the frogs seem to have agreed it's time to nap. The moon has crowned the temple's central tower, and you, drifting from pond to path to shadow, feel like you've stepped into the mind of the past, one drop at a time. You pass under a low stone arch, ducking instinctively even though there's enough room above your head. The ceiling is ribbed with soft green moss, and you can hear water somewhere. Steady, but not flowing. It's the sound of drip. Pause. Drip. It's almost hypnotic. You follow the sound to a small alcove. Inside, a plain stone basin centered beneath a narrow hole in the ceiling. From that hole, water falls, one drop at a time, into the bowl below. There's no rush, no splash, just the quiet plink of time, measured out drop by drop. It's not much to look at. No gilded edges or dramatic carvings here, but you're seeing it now for what it might have been. A water clock or something like it. A clepsydra if you want to impress your friends, which you won't, because you're whispering about ancient Khmer hydraulics to yourself in a dark corridor at 2 a.m. But still, the idea's simple. You poke a hole in a container, let the water escape slowly, and mark the level over time. Or the other way around. Collect drops into a bowl, and when the water hits a line, that's your cue. Time to light incense, or chant, or call the elephants. Historians mostly agree water clocks existed in ancient Southeast Asia. There are written references in neighbouring cultures, China, India, even Java. But when it comes to the Khmer Empire, the evidence is like this basin. Quiet, humble, easily overlooked. Still, you're standing in front of one, and it's doing exactly what a clock should do. It's marking now, and now, and now. Of course, we don't know exactly how the Khmers calibrated these things. There were no standard drip rates printed on the side, but some believe they added certain minerals or dyes to the water to control flow speed, sticky fluids that moved slower, or special oils that formed layered clocks. One fringe theory claims coconut oil was used in place of water because it flowed more consistently in tropical humidity. If true, that would make this the world's first coconut-scented alarm clock. You lean in, listening. The basin below the drip is perfectly still except where each droplet breaks the surface. You can almost imagine monks in saffron robes, waiting quietly for the final drop to fall before beginning a ceremony. No gong, no countdown. Just silence and water. And here's something funny. The more you think about it, the more this little system feels smarter than some modern ones. No wires, no batteries, no chance of losing signal, just gravity and patience. The room around you is small and dim, but you start to notice little holes along the base of the walls, outflow channels. The clock resets itself once full. That means someone, or something, designed it not just to measure time, but to forget time too, to empty out the past and start over. There's something very Buddhist about that. You stand, stretch your back, and step back into the corridor. Your footsteps echo faintly, stone on stone, wrapped in moss. You realise now that nearly every chamber you've passed through tonight might have doubled as a timepiece, a ritual chamber, or both. This was divine plumbing, yes, but also sacred scheduling. Even the massive pools and moats served a function, not just spiritual metaphors of cosmic oceans, but literal regulators of water pressure and temperature. Some temples were built with hidden channels underneath to redirect overflow from monsoon rains in precisely measured bursts. Others had covered basins that could store water for weeks, keeping a steady level despite the season. One inscription, now half erased by centuries of wind and algae, hints that the watery heart of a temple must be balanced or the harmony is lost. That's one part poetry, one part civil engineering. Historians still argue whether these hidden hydraulic systems were religious in nature or just really advanced rain gutters. But considering the lengths the Khmers went to in their designs, aligning towers with solstices, mirroring heaven with water, it's hard not to see something deeper flowing beneath it all. And here's a neat detail. The timing mechanisms weren't just used for daily rituals. Some temples may have used them to schedule royal visits or manage community tasks. Picture it. The king's chariot arriving just as the drip bowl hits full. A servant runs out shouting, "Now is the auspicious hour." Not because the stars said so, but because the water did. You step into another open courtyard now, this one quieter than the last. A single tree grows in the centre, roots clutching the stone like a secret. Its leaves catch droplets from an overhead pipe, and you swear the rhythm matches the one you heard in the last chamber. Could this whole complex be synchronized? A network of echoing drips? Quirky fact. There's a theory that certain Khmer temples were acoustically designed to amplify the sound of dripping water. That way, monks could hear the shift in rhythm from across the complex, like a slow, holy metronome. One researcher even tried to map drip frequencies across different chambers, until he realised some frogs were throwing off the data. Still, the idea holds water. You circle the tree slowly, noticing how the roots seem to avoid the carved channels in the floor, almost respectfully, as if even nature understands not to mess with Khmer timekeeping. You glance up at a weathered inscription carved high into one of the courtyard pillars. It's nearly worn away, but a local guide once claimed it tells the story of a temple that ran perfectly for decades, until a small shift in the water flow threw everything off. Ceremonies happened too early, dreams were mistimed. The gods, presumably, were displeased. The temple was abandoned soon after. Maybe, or maybe it just got too soggy. You smile and walk toward the far side of the courtyard. A shallow step descends into a low passage, where you hear, yes, the same plink again. You follow it, step by slow step, each drop marking the passage, a different basin, a different hour, but the same idea. Time here is not counted. It happens quietly, softly, drip by drip. You move deeper into the passage, and the world gets quieter still. It's the kind of silence that has weight to it, the kind that pushes against your chest and fills your ears with a faint hum, like the inside of a seashell. The drip continues ahead, the sound bouncing strangely off the narrow stone walls, folding back on itself like a chant heard from behind a door, and there it is again. Drip, a perfect echoing note. You reach a small, square chamber. The air is cooler here, staler but not unpleasant. The ceiling is lower, and at its centre is another tiny aperture, maybe the width of a coin. Below it, like a stage waiting for its only performer, is a stone bowl positioned just so. The water, having travelled from who knows where, falls in solitary drops. Slow, steady, each one falling with uncanny precision into the bowl's centre. You crouch beside it, just to watch. The bowl isn't decorated, there's no inscription. But you notice it's perfectly balanced, its lip aligned with grooves in the floor which slope away toward a hidden drainage point. You touch the bowl gently, and it doesn't move, as if rooted into the temple itself. Historians still argue whether this setup was a true clepsydra, an active timekeeping device, or just part of the temple's drainage. But the placement, the symmetry, the effort it would have taken to install it, it feels intentional, like something crafted to be not just useful but meaningful. And meaningful things tend to survive, even when most of us forget why they were meaningful in the first place. You imagine a novice monk assigned to this chamber. It's his only job. Sit, watch, listen. Maybe whisper a mantra for every drop. A living clock with legs and a shaved head. It might seem tedious to us now, but for him, it would have been sacred, calming, predictable. In a world full of spirits, wild elephants, and temperamental kings, maybe this drip was the only certainty. You watch for another minute. Drip, drip. You start to feel your heartbeat fall into sync. Your breath slows, then the air shifts, ever so slightly. A cooler breeze or perhaps a subtle drop in pressure. And just like that, the tempo changes. The drip speeds up. You blink, just a little faster now, like the temple is nudging you gently forward. You rise and continue, stepping carefully into the corridor that leads out of the chamber. The stone here is slick, and your sandals squeak slightly against the floor. You imagine what this must have been like in the rainy season. Everything drenched, the water racing through these channels and the temple humming like a giant metronome pushed into overdrive. Quirky fact, some Khmer temples had angled roof tiles designed not just to shed water, but to direct it towards certain ritual collection points, and it wasn't random. One scholar found that the water from different roof sections carried symbolic significance. East side water for purification, west side for ancestral rites, and so on. It's not just a leak, it's liturgy. You step into a long, dimly lit hall and find a curious sight. A line of small terracotta bowls embedded into a bench-like ledge. They're all the same shape, but vary slightly in size. The holes at their bases are tiny, almost invisible. This, you realize, is a drip sequence, a graduated water clock. Each bowl fills until it tips into the next, one after the other, a cascade of miniature time markers. It's genius. No moving parts, no flames to tend, just a quiet procession of drips, bowls, and gravity. It's unclear exactly what intervals these bowls measured, maybe half an hour, maybe longer, but the idea was to standardize temple rituals. If you knew how long a full cycle took, you could time offerings, music, chants, even naps. You imagine the soft sound of that system in motion. Drip, fill, spill, reset. It's like the gentle ticking of a wind chime soaked in moss. But of course, things didn't always go smoothly. Historians have found evidence that, over time, debris clogged these tiny systems. Algae grew, leaves fell in, monsoon overflow threw the rhythm off. There's even one stone inscription where a temple overseer blames a failed harvest on the forgetful bowls, which is either metaphor or a truly savage review of ancient plumbing. You smile, even sacred timekeepers get gummed up sometimes. There's another carving along the corridor wall, this one less refined. Rough lines show a human figure with arms raised toward a series of bowls, with what looks like water streaming between them. At first glance it's crude, but something about it feels earnest, like a scribbled diagram left behind by a tired apprentice. A last attempt to explain how it all worked, and here's where things get deliciously uncertain. Some scholars think this carving is literal, a how-to guide for maintaining the water sequence. Others believe it's symbolic, illustrating the flow of spiritual energy through different realms. And a few more daring voices say it's a map of consciousness itself. Yep, the temple might be a clock and a brain. You step into a side chamber now where the walls are damp and slick with age. Here the drip is slower, much slower. One drop, every 7 seconds. You count them without meaning to. It's soothing. 1, 2, plink. It's said that some monks could time their meditations this way, breathing in rhythm with the drops, entering trance-like states where time melted. Not a moment wasted, nor rushed. Just pure, slow presence. You touch the stone and feel the coolness seep into your skin. Here, in this shadowy space, you're reminded that time isn't just something to be measured, it's something to be felt. And as you prepare to leave the chamber, you glance back at the final bowl. The water trembles, a tiny moonlit dome rising from its surface. Then it falls. Plink. You ease back into the corridor, stepping softly now, like your own footsteps might disrupt the fragile rhythm you've just witnessed. Everything here feels delicately aligned. Drops, shadows, silence. You're not just walking through a ruin, you're moving through choreography. And as you emerge into another courtyard bathed in soft moonlight, something catches your eye. Lines in the stone. Not just decorative borders, but long, careful grooves, like tracks made by fingers or tools centuries ago. You follow one with your toe, and it leads to a small opening in the wall, just wide enough for sunlight to pass through, which of course is exactly the point. Historians believe many Khmer temples were designed to capture sunlight at very specific times of day and year, marking solstices, equinoxes, and royal anniversaries. One beam of light striking one statue on one morning a year, that's not an accident. That's calendar-level precision, in sandstone. The fun part. We still don't fully understand how all of them worked. Some shafts of light only appear once a year, illuminating a carving or altar that seems to come alive just for that moment. One temple in Siem Reap is famous for lighting up the face of Vishnu precisely at dawn on the spring equinox. No electricity, no mirrors, just time and angle, rehearsed for centuries. It's like setting an alarm clock and waiting 365 days for it to ring. You step slowly around the courtyard, watching how the moonlight slants in from one corner. It's not just lighting the space, it's dividing it, drawing long, sharp shadows across the stone floor. You glance down and notice your own silhouette, cast at a sharp angle. Here's a dreamy idea. What if you are now part of the temple's timekeeping? A living sundial, your shadow marking a point in space just as ancient monks once did. It's humbling and a little unnerving, but mostly, it's oddly soothing. You remember reading that the Khmer people didn't think of time as something linear. It wasn't about progress, it was about rhythm, cycles, returning to balance. That's why everything in their temples, light, water, music, even smell, was arranged to repeat and reset, like breathing. Some researchers suggest that large ceremonial plazas were designed not just for gatherings, but to let sunlight and moonlight track across them like hands on a clock. The spaces were wide open, not to impress visitors, but to give the sky room to move across them, to let time write itself in shadow. You pause in the centre of one of these open areas now and look around. 4 spires mark the corners. Each one casts its own shade. You could stand here for a full day if you weren't, human, and watch how the spire's shadows rotate around you, like the arms of a massive sun-driven clock. Quirky fact: some Khmer texts describe time using metaphors of movement. The shadow creeps like a snake, or the hour folds like lotus petals. So even if there was no word for 12 o'clock, there was certainly a poetic way to say, "The sun is right above my soup." You make your way up a narrow staircase now, worn smooth by 1,000 years of feet. Royal, monkish, barefoot, and now yours. At the top, another doorway, and beyond it, a high platform that faces east. You stand there and imagine the first light of morning cutting through the trees, slipping through a slot in the wall, and landing on a single idol. Imagine being the person who had to get that just right. Historians still debate whether these alignments were made for specific festivals or simply as displays of divine order. Was it about astronomy, agriculture, or just the king reminding people he could talk to the sun? You pass a weathered bas-relief along the wall, another celestial dance frozen in stone. Dancers whirl in a circle, their arms raised like sunbeams. But what's peculiar is that each dancer's foot touches a small square beneath her, like stepping stones, like a clock face. Some suggest these reliefs were ritual instructions, that temple dancers were trained to move in time with sunlight and shadow. It sounds whimsical until you realize how precisely they carved everything else. Why not the choreography too? And here's where it gets both lovely and a little chaotic. The weather didn't always cooperate. The monsoon season, for instance, threw everything off. No shadows, no sunlight, just grey skies and dripping walls. And what happens to your celestial calendar when the sun forgets to show up for a week? You improvise, or you panic. There's a story about one temple festival where the sun failed to hit its mark at dawn, and the priest had to delay the ritual. The king, unimpressed, reportedly blamed angry spirits and ordered extra incense to be burned, and 2 astrologers to be mildly scolded. Not executed, just scolded, gently, Khmer style. You smile imagining the frantic calculations, the nervous monks, and one very grumpy crocodile lounging nearby, entirely unfazed. And that's the thing. You begin to see that this system, for all its cleverness, was also fragile. A single cloud, a blocked channel, a wandering monkey. It could all shift the rhythm. But instead of abandoning it, the Khmer embraced the unpredictability. The temples weren't built to defy time. They were built to notice it, to welcome its quirks, to celebrate the fact that time doesn't march, it meanders. You sit down on the edge of the high platform, letting your legs dangle. The air is still. The stars are out now, and a breeze brushes your face like a whisper from a very old calendar. Your shadow's gone. Moonlight has shifted. A new hour has arrived, and the temple, quiet, massive, dripping, keeps watching it go by. You descend from the high platform, each step carrying you further into the temple's hush, into the darker arteries of the complex where few tourists tread. The corridors feel tighter now, the carvings more worn, the air thicker, as if the walls themselves are saturated with centuries of breath and prayer. This is where the monks worked, not the priests with ceremonial fans and golden umbrellas, but the ones in saffron robes, quietly handling the mechanics of sacred routine, the engineers of enlightenment. You spot the remains of a small chamber. Plain walls, no grand entrance, but a deep niche carved into one side. Inside the niche, what looks like a pedestal, with a shallow circular depression at the centre. A bowl, long vanished, maybe metal, maybe clay. And above it, a perfectly round hole in the ceiling, precisely centred. This was no accident. You step beneath it and imagine the scene. A monk kneeling in the early hours of morning before the sun, before the birds. Candlelight flickers off the damp stone, and then drop, drop. A rhythm begins. The monk's breath follows. Chanting begins. Not because of a clock, but because the water said so. There's something deeply human about that. Waiting for water to fall, then acting. No alarms, no rush. Just trust in gravity and silence. And now consider this. These monks weren't just sitting here with candles and bowls. Some were recording data. Yep. Scribes with bamboo pens and palm leaf manuscripts, keeping logs of rainfall patterns, sunrise alignments, and how long each bowl took to fill on certain days of the year. Mainstream historians confirm the Khmer kept detailed astronomical and agricultural records. They needed to know when to plant, when to harvest, when the floodplains would return. But there's also reason to believe they tracked time for ritual purposes, with a kind of divine bureaucracy that makes your Outlook calendar look like cave art. Quirky fact: some Khmer temple records mention specific auspicious minutes, not just hours or days, minutes. That level of specificity suggests some kind of tool more precise than just looking at the sun and guessing. And while the temples might not have had gears or pendulums, they did have patience and water. You move further down the corridor and past what looks like a tiny window set high in the wall. A shaft of moonlight filters through it, hitting the floor at a perfect angle. There's a dark spot where the light lands, a patch of stone smoother than the rest, worn by years of attention. Was this a marker? A place where light struck at the same time every night? Some scholars suggest these light markers acted as silent bells. If the beam touched this patch, it was time to begin the next cycle. Chanting, praying, sweeping, whatever was next on the eternal to-do list. These weren't just monks, they were timekeepers. You hear something now, a low rustling. You pause, heart slow but curious. Just a gecko slipping along the wall, pausing to blink at you with ancient indifference. You whisper, "Hello," because why not? Then your gaze drifts to the floor, and you notice something. Worn grooves, forming parallel lines, each only an inch deep. A track, like something was dragged or rolled here over and over. Maybe a sliding partition. Maybe a wooden stand with a timekeeping bowl. Or perhaps the monks themselves wore down the stone, kneeling in the same spot so many times the floor began to remember them. Historians still debate what many of these interior features were for. Without inscriptions, it's guesswork. But when every inch of the temple seems carefully planned, it's hard not to assign meaning to every groove and shadow. You reach a side chamber. This one has something rare. a faint painting still clinging to the plastered wall. You hold your breath as you take it in. A seated figure, monk or spirit, it's hard to tell, holds a bowl in one hand and what might be a stylus or reed in the other. Around him, ripples, or flames, or perhaps the suggestion of time unfolding in spirals. It's been scratched and faded by the centuries, but it's undeniably there. Someone thought this image important enough to preserve, tucked away where only the temple's caretakers would see it. A private reminder. Time is sacred, but it's also something you participate in. Not a force that happens to you, but a rhythm you choose to match. Quirky detail. One researcher proposed that monks were assigned specific hours to live in solitude, literally keeping time with their bodies. They'd eat, pray, and rest on a cycle dictated by water clocks, becoming part of the temple's pulse. A living mechanism, like gears in a divine watch. You feel that now. The stillness isn't empty, it's full of tempo. You can almost hum along with it, like a slow, silent song written in stone. A breeze moves through the corridor, carrying with it the faint smell of damp earth and something vaguely floral, maybe jasmine, maybe just imagination. You pause at a window cut low in the wall, an odd feature, almost too low to be useful. But when you kneel, the moonlight slides in perfectly, forming a neat white bar across the centre of the floor. This, perhaps, was a midnight marker. Think about that. A shaft of light so subtle, visible for only a few minutes each night, telling a lone monk it was time to strike a gong, light a lantern, or simply sit in silence. Time, here, is something you notice, not chase. And as you rise from your knees and step away, you feel a strange pull. Not nostalgia exactly. Something older. Like the temple is asking you to remember a rhythm you once knew but forgot in the noise of schedules and pings and progress bars. You walk softly now, slowly. The monks are gone, but the rhythm remains. You step outside again, the thick temple walls giving way to a sudden openness, a clearing, wide and flat, bordered by palm trees that sway gently in the breeze. The air feels different out here, warmer, wetter. You're standing at the edge of one of Angkor's many ancient braes, or reservoirs. It stretches out in front of you like a still, dark ocean, too large to be a simple moat, too precise to be a natural lake. The braes are one of the Khmer Empire's great mysteries. On the surface, they're marvels of hydraulic engineering, gigantic, symmetrical, and straight-lined to a degree that modern drone surveys still struggle to explain. But under the moonlight, with the surface smooth as obsidian, you get the sense they were also clocks, big ones. This beret, the West Beret, is over 5 miles long. It's basically a water monument the size of a small country. Historians agree it was used for irrigation, especially during the dry season, helping farmers grow multiple crops per year. But some argue it was more than that it functioned as a seasonal gauge, a year-round timekeeper for an empire tied to the rhythms of water. How? Well, picture the water rising and falling over the year, dictated by rains, runoff, and channel flow. At specific levels, certain ritual sites within or around the beret became accessible or submerged. Perhaps a shrine appeared just as the water reached its high point. Perhaps it vanished at the low. That means the beret wasn't just a water source, it was a visual calendar. And the further you explore the Khmer Empire's temples and reservoirs, the more this idea repeats. The relationship between water and time wasn't symbolic, it was structural. The temples didn't just exist beside the water, they were synchronized with it. As you walk along the embankment, the moonlight glints off small stepping stones half buried in the grass. Some of them lead down toward the edge of the beret, in straight lines that seem pointless until you consider one possibility. They marked flood stages, like ruler marks etched into the earth. Quirky fact: one French explorer in the 19th century described finding wooden pegs driven into the embankment, spaced at irregular intervals. He assumed they were part of a ruined dock system. Later, scholars suggested they were, in fact, water gauges, early Khmer flood indicators. Primitive? Sure. Effective? Undeniably. You pause at a small outcropping that overlooks the water. It's silent out here, no drip, no chant, just the occasional rustle of wind in the reeds. You sit, letting your legs dangle over the edge, and wonder how many monks, farmers, and kings once stood exactly where you are, watching the water level rise or fall and thinking, so this is what month it is. Historians still argue whether the berets were built primarily for ritual or agriculture. The truth, as usual, is probably both. The Khmer were practical and poetic. They saw no contradiction in using a reservoir to grow rice and worship the god Vishnu. If anything, the overlap made it more sacred. And speaking of rice, here's a sleepy statistic. One full beret operating efficiently could support enough rice production for hundreds of thousands of people. That's not just timing, that's empire building. Controlled, irrigated, seasonal farming, driven by water clocks the size of entire cities. You continue walking along the edge until you spot something unusual. A small platform half submerged in the bare. It's square, slightly raised, and faces the central temple axis. The locals call it a floating shrine, but it doesn't actually float. What it does is reveal itself only at certain water levels. Some archaeologists believe it marked the lunar cycle, that the moon's pull combined with seasonal rain patterns subtly altered the bare's level. And this shrine was the empire's monthly stopwatch. When it surfaced, the priests knew what to do. Others say it was simply aesthetic, a decorative island. But that's the thing with Khmer architecture. It's always both. Beautiful and functional, spiritual and scientific. And here comes a fringe theory you'll love. Some researchers think the positioning of the berets and their connection through canals to other temples formed a kind of water-based time zone system. That's right, time zones. Since elevation and rainfall varied across the empire, the clocks, whether they were drip bowls, shadow markers, or reservoir levels, would be slightly out of sync in different locations. A priest in Preah Khan might light the ritual fire at one time, while another in Bakong would do so half an hour later, based on local water cues. No GMT, no standardization, just regional rhythms. You chuckle at the idea of a Khmer monk trying to coordinate festival timing across the empire. Okay, we'll chant at sundown. Your time or mine? It's also worth noting that not all temples were equal. Some were cosmopolitan megastructures like Angkor Wat, filled with layers of celestial metaphor and perfectly symmetrical timekeeping systems. Others were swamp temples, less formal, more chaotic, their timing dictated more by rainfall and luck than design. You reach the far end of the bare and find a small stone sluice gate, half choked with reeds. This too was part of the system. By opening or closing these channels, the monks could regulate how much water passed into temple pools, ritual tanks, or farming fields. In doing so, they weren't just managing water, they were managing events. A delayed flood meant a delayed planting. A delayed planting meant a delayed harvest. And so the entire rhythm of life, ceremony, community, even sleep, danced to the pace of the beret. You sit for a moment beside the gate, your fingers trailing through the water. It's cool, still, deceptively simple. But it's holding up an entire history. A history measured not in years or dynasties, but in ripples. And as you stand, ready to return to the temple complex, you glance back one last time. The beret lies behind you now, wide and silent, but still ticking. The temple path winds you back from the edge of the beret and into the undergrowth. Tall grasses brushing your knees, frogs leaping just out of reach with lazy plops into puddles. You follow a narrow stone walkway that was once much busier, lined with pilgrims and processions. Now it's mostly moss and the occasional sleepy gecko. You're heading toward one of the quieter temple pools, a modest rectangular basin tucked between two shrines. It's not symmetrical, not grand. In fact, it looks like someone just decided this was a good spot for a hole and started digging. But as you crouch beside it, you notice something strange. It's alive. Not just alive with plants or insects, but with motion, subtle and constant. Tiny fish darting here and there, frogs clinging to ledges, dragonflies hovering just above the surface. Ripples chase each other across the water, a soft splash from somewhere in the reeds. It's chaos, honestly. And if this was part of a timekeeping system, well, it's not exactly Swiss precision. But here's the thing. Some scholars believe the Khmer embraced these natural interferences, that animals weren't just tolerated in temple pools, they were part of the ritual. There's a theory, unproven but irresistible, that temple priests used the movement of certain creatures as soft cues. The idea is simple. When frogs start calling, it's around sunset. When dragonflies hover low, the air is thick with moisture, possibly hinting at upcoming rain. When the pool fish cluster at the edges, the temperature's shifted. You're basically looking at the ancient Khmer version of a weather app. Quirky fact: in one preserved folktale from the region, a particularly noisy frog in a temple pool was considered a messenger of the hour. When it croaked 3 times in succession, it was believed to signal the right time to begin evening chants. If it didn't croak at all, monks would wait in silence, unsure if the schedule had shifted or if the frog had simply taken the night off. You laugh softly at the image. A chorus of monks stalled by an uncooperative amphibian. Spiritual calendars brought to a halt by a moody little green guy. But really, this illustrates something deeper: the fluid nature of Khmer timekeeping. It wasn't rigid, it wasn't nailed to a ticking gear. It was responsive, organic, a little messy, and it made room for accidents. Historians still argue whether the unpredictability of these animal-assisted systems was intentional or a compromise. Maybe they just worked with what they had. Or maybe they recognized a wisdom in randomness, a logic that defies clocks and calendars. You walk the edge of the pool, eyes scanning the water's surface. It's not crystal clear, it's silty, tinted green, with fallen leaves and the occasional bubble rising from below. A temple turtle bobs into view, gives you a blink, then disappears again without a sound. That turtle, by the way, it may have been sacred. Some ponds were thought to house guardian creatures, symbols of longevity, wisdom, or cosmic balance. Whether real or mythologized, these animals played a role in how people perceived time, not just as ticking moments, but as patterns of behavior, seasons of presence. And speaking of patterns, you spot something just under the waterline, a grid of small stones, evenly spaced beneath the surface, like a submerged checkerboard. You step closer. A few are missing, but the grid is clear. Was it decorative? Possibly, but some suggest it was a timing aid, each stone representing a segment of time, covered or uncovered as the water level rose and fell, a countdown written in granite and algae. But of course, all of this only worked if the water cooperated, and the animals, and the weather, and perhaps fate. One colonial-era report from the 1800s tells of a monk who insisted his temple's time system was haunted because the frogs stopped croaking entirely for 3 months. No rain came, no chants were scheduled, the rhythm collapsed. Eventually the frogs returned, and so did the rituals. But the monk supposedly never trusted the pond again, switched to candles. You find a wide stone step and sit for a while, feet dangling above the water. A gentle breeze stirs the trees, and you hear the tiniest lapping sound against the far wall of the pool. There's something deeply comforting in this natural rhythm, slow, soft, undemanding. This isn't time as we know it, chopped into deadlines and blinking reminders. This is time that breathes, that watches, that waits. You recall a phrase from a Khmer inscription: "The water waits with the patience of the mountain." Nobody knows what the original context was. Maybe it referred to irrigation, maybe ritual, but it fits. You feel it now. Somewhere behind you, a frog croaks, once, then again, then silence. You can't help but grin. There's no gong, no bell tower, no priest announcing the hour. Just that single sound bouncing off ancient stone and water. And maybe, in this sleepy corner of the temple complex, that's all the clock you ever needed. You linger a little longer by the pond, the stillness sinking into your skin like a warm bath drawn at midnight. But eventually you rise and head toward a narrower path, worn, winding and overgrown in places with ferns and tiny pink blossoms that seem to open just for moonlight. You brush them aside as you walk, the foliage springing back in your wake like soft applause. Ahead another temple looms, this one smaller than Angkor Wat, but still crowned with curling towers and guarded by headless statues. Its sandstone glows faintly in the night, like the shell of some ancient creature still radiating a pulse. You pass beneath a lintel carved with gods mid-dance. Their arms swirl in spirals, and their hair lifts like wind-blown clouds. But what pulls your gaze isn't the dancers, it's what's beneath them. A carving of a massive hourglass, flanked by 2 hands pouring water from clay pots. Vishnu's hourglass, some call it. This is where it gets interesting. Mainstream historians don't entirely agree on what this symbol meant. Some say it's just a decorative flourish. Others claim it reflects Hindu cosmology, where time moves in vast cycles, from creation to destruction, and back again. But then there are the fringe thinkers, the ones who believe this hourglass is literal, that it's a metaphor for the actual water clocks used in the temple, and more curiously, for the empire's obsession with preserving sacred timing. You place your hand gently against the carved hourglass. It's only a few inches high, but something about it feels bigger, like a reminder. Drip in, drip out, the turning of eras, the countdown of dynasties. You pass into the temple interior, where a small central sanctuary waits. It's stripped of its deity now, looted or removed centuries ago, but the base is still there, surrounded by 4 narrow channels that trace away like veins. You kneel down for a closer look. The channels don't lead to drains, they feed into small bowls carved into the floor. Could they have once caught ritual water, marked intervals, or were they symbolic of something greater? Historians still argue whether these floor bowls had a functional use or were simply ceremonial, but what's certain is their alignment, perfectly to the cardinal directions: north, south, east, west, as if they were meant to collect more than water, perhaps the elements, or time itself. And here's a quirky twist. One Khmer inscription describes these basins as the 4 mouths of the lion who drinks the sun. No one's entirely sure what that means. But if a lion is drinking the sun, and each mouth is pointing outward, well, it sounds like a poetic attempt to track time by solar position. Either that, or someone was having a really vivid dream and decided to carve it in stone. You sit back, the silence of the chamber folding over you like a blanket. Above, a shaft in the ceiling points straight to the sky, an opening that might have been aligned to a specific constellation, or to let sunlight strike the altar below at noon. Or maybe it was just ventilation. But when you stand and look through it, you see nothing but stars. You step back outside, back into the temple courtyard, where one last carving catches your eye. It's a simple figure, seated, serene, holding 2 objects, a lotus in one hand and what looks like a small bowl with a drop falling into it in the other. It's not labelled, but locals sometimes call it the timekeeper. Was he real? A monk? A priest? A symbolic deity? No one knows. But what's powerful is the stillness in that carving, the calm acceptance of the drip, the lotus unfurling, and the sense that time doesn't need to be chased, it just needs to be witnessed. And the temple layout around you seems to echo this message. It doesn't shout its brilliance, it whispers it. The water clocks aren't front and centre, they're tucked away, quiet, humble, just like the monks who maintained them, just like time itself. Quirky fact. During one excavation in the early 2000s, archaeologists discovered a small sealed chamber beneath a collapsed shrine. Inside, a perfectly preserved stone bowl beneath a drip hole, still in place, still aligned, still slowly collecting rainwater after centuries of abandonment, and yes, it was full. They left it exactly as they found it. You stand quietly thinking about that bowl, still working, still marking time no one notices. Maybe that's the real secret of the Khmer temples. Not just that they tracked the sun and water and shadows, but that they did so expecting no applause. The timing wasn't for people, it was for the rhythm itself, for balance. You walk to the far edge of the temple, where the jungle begins again. Vines hang low, and fireflies blink lazily in the underbrush. As you step into the thicket, you notice the temperature shift. Cooler, damper, more intimate. The air smells of old stone and orchid, and far in the distance you hear something familiar. Drip, then again, drip. As if another temple hidden just beyond the trees is still keeping time, still listening, still waiting. The trees close around you now, tall and ancient, their gnarled roots tangling across your path like sleeping serpents. The temple behind you fades into shadow, its towers just silhouettes against the starlit sky. Ahead, something larger looms in the darkness. Angkor Thom. You feel it before you see it. The change in air pressure, the distant echo of wind moving through massive stone gates. Once the bustling capital of the Khmer Empire, now it's quiet, save for the occasional bird shifting in its sleep. You pass through the south gate, beneath the serene faces carved into its towers. Buddha-like but royal, watching everything, even you, always you, is. Inside the walls, the layout stretches wide and orderly. Roads fanned out in a grid, great plazas once filled with elephants and dancers and ceremonies, and somewhere amid it all, ticking silently beneath the night sky, were clocks made of stone and shadow. Angkor Thom, like Angkor Wat, wasn't just a city. It was a mechanism, a great cosmic machine. And though its grandeur may have faded, the logic behind it, its quiet timekeeping, still pulses beneath your feet. You make your way to the Bayon Temple, the famous center of this sleeping city. Its towers rise like lotus buds frozen mid-bloom, and every surface is carved with faces. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, smiling, faintly smug, undeniably calm. You step closer, brushing moss from the edge of a balustrade. The texture is soft, velvet-like, and the stone beneath it cold. But here's the strange thing. The smiles seem to follow you. Not in a haunted way, more in the way a clock might follow you if it had a face. And maybe that's the point. There's a theory, whispered more than published, that the faces of the Bayon themselves represent time. Morning, noon, twilight, and midnight, the eternal cycle. Their expressions don't change, but their placement across the towers reflects the changing light. Sun rises here, sets there. Smile catches it, smile lets it go. You stand in the central chamber now, surrounded by those impassive gazes. A breeze moves through the temple's narrow vertical shafts, and you hear it again. Drip. Somewhere behind you, deep in a corridor. You follow the sound. Always the sound. And there it is. A basin, smaller than most, tucked away between two carved pillars. The drip lands right in the middle, the surface so still that each drop sends a perfect ring outward, like a signal being broadcast to the stone itself. You kneel beside it and notice something odd. The ripples are lopsided. One edge of the bowl is worn down more than the others. You lean in. It's not cracked, just used. Like someone, maybe generations of someone's, knelt here, day after day, waiting for the water to reach that worn mark, the monk's timer. You don't need a plaque to explain it. This was a moment machine, and even now, it works. Mainstream historians acknowledge that the Bayon had a complex relationship with time. It served not only as the spiritual heart of the empire, but as a kind of ceremonial scheduler. Royal audiences, court rituals, public blessings, they all followed rhythms, not just dates, but tones, light, water, sound, the way a place felt at a particular hour. It's said that when the moon was full, the central tower of Bayon aligned perfectly with a constellation worshipped by the Khmer kings. Was it Orion, Draco, Sagittarius? Depends on who you ask. Historians still argue whether the whole complex was an observatory disguised as a palace. What they don't argue is that the water basins, the windows, and the layout all show intentional orientation, tuned to the sky, the land, and probably the rituals that stitch them together. You wander deeper into the temple, passing a series of bas-reliefs. These aren't the high-stakes battles or grand religious epics you might expect. They're domestic scenes, fishers hauling nets, children chasing birds, traders selling spices. And in the middle of one panel you pause. A figure holds a bowl under a water spout gazing upward. Around him, others pray, cook, carry bundles of reeds. But he waits, perfectly still, bowl outstretched. A monk, a timekeeper, a reminder. You smile. It's subtle, easy to miss. But once you see it, you can't unsee it. Another moment machine. Quirky fact. One modern archaeologist admitted that he spent a full week mapping shadow movements inside Bayon before realizing his own body was part of the experiment. The shadows changed because he was there. He wasn't measuring time. Time was measuring him. And maybe that's what's happening to you now. You head outside the main sanctuary and into the open plaza, now overrun with weeds and the occasional cow during daylight hours. Tonight it's yours. The stone platform glows silver in the moonlight, and your own shadow stretches across the carved floor. Long, slow. You pace forward, and the shadow follows. Not precisely, not mathematically, but enough. You're the sundial now. For a brief, sleepy moment, you feel it all clicking into place. The temples, the basins, the frogs, the silence, the smiles. It's not about minutes or seconds. It never was. Khmer timekeeping didn't measure duration. It measured presence, and you are very much here. Somewhere nearby, a gecko chirps. A drop of water falls. A wind moves through the temple towers, and the city, sleeping, massive, smiling, keeps time. You leave Bayon behind with its quiet faces watching your back, still smiling, still unmoved by time, and follow a narrow footpath that snakes through the heart of Angkor Thom. It's lined with broken stones, toppled balustrades, and pillars swallowed by banyan roots. The moonlight paints everything in ghostly silver, turning vine and trunk into silent spectators. Somewhere ahead, behind a stand of palm trees and the flutter of night insects, lies the royal palace, or what's left of it. Most of the palace was built with wood, long since claimed by the jungle, but the stone terraces and ceremonial ponds remain. You approach one of these pools now, rectangular, deep, and eerily clean despite the centuries. The edges are carved with shallow stairs that descend into the water, and at the far end is a platform with a long raised seat. It looks like a throne, or perhaps a judging bench, but tonight it's just a stone couch for moonbeams. This, they say, is where Khmer kings once bathed, and not just to wash off the sweat of empire. No, bathing was ceremonial, timed, sacred. The water had to reach a certain level before a royal bath could begin. And how did they know when the time was right? Water clocks. You step to the edge of the platform and peer into the pool. At the far corner, nearly hidden beneath the ledge, is a carved channel, small, precise, and sloped. A runoff path, perhaps. But some archaeologists think it served a different function. When water reached this level, the channel would begin to drip, creating a steady sound. Like a temple bell, but quieter. More discreet. Fit for royalty. It's not impossible to believe. The Khmer kings weren't just warlords with crowns. They were semi-divine timekeepers, expected to rule with cosmic harmony in mind. And that meant syncing their daily routine, meals, ceremonies, appearances, with celestial events and sacred rhythms. The king didn't just rule time, he obeyed it. There's even an inscription on a stele found nearby that says, "The king rises when the east pool sings." Scholars still argue whether that meant literal music or just the gurgle of the morning water level tipping into the next phase. And here's a fun, slightly absurd theory from a French colonial archivist, that the king had a designated water reader, a palace official whose sole job was to monitor the sound of dripping water from ceremonial basins and inform the monarch when it was officially time to eat, pray, or receive guests. Imagine that. A full-time royal hydra clock whisperer. You chuckle, picturing a man with a scroll and a feathered hat nodding solemnly at the king after listening to the third splash of the morning. Your Majesty, it is time to schedule the elephant parade. You circle the pond slowly, and something strange happens. The light shifts. The moon passes behind a thin veil of cloud, and for a moment, everything is darkness. Then, just as quickly, the light returns, and now it hits a small circular carving near the stairs that you hadn't seen before. It's a lotus, partially submerged in the stone, its petals drawn back like it's blooming from within the wall. At its centre, a small depression, a bowl. Once again, the silent observer of time. You touch the carving and realise it aligns with a stone window across the terrace. During sunrise, perhaps just on certain days, a beam of light would fall through that opening and strike this exact lotus. That was the king's cue. Light as a signal, water as the timer. Mainstream historians mostly agree that Khmer royal ceremonies were deeply tied to astrology and solar cycles, but not everyone's convinced these alignments were deliberate. Some say they're architectural coincidences, just the result of symmetrical design. Still, when the light hits that one carved lotus with such precision, well, it feels like the sun's in on the secret. Quirky detail. One temple chronicle describes a bathing day in which the king delayed the ceremony because the sacred ripple did not speak. Rainfall had been late. The water clock apparently hadn't triggered. Rather than force the ritual, the court waited, delayed the entire festival until the next morning when the sound returned. Imagine that. A king rescheduling his big moment because the water didn't feel ready. You wander now to a smaller annex building, once a side chamber for advisors or scribes. Inside, on the floor, are faint outlines of square hollows, maybe storage bins, maybe seating areas, but one in particular stands out. It has a shallow, bowl-shaped dip at its centre, and a trail of stains leading to the wall. Someone once sat here for hours, days, listening. Perhaps this was the palace's timekeeping office. The chamber where someone, maybe in silence, maybe chanting, tracked the rhythm of water, watching the bowls fill, marking the hours. Not with urgency, not with alarms, but with awareness, with grace. The jungle presses close outside. Crickets sing their sleepy chorus, and a breeze stirs the tall grasses near the outer wall. The night is winding down, but the city still watches, still measures. As you exit the ruins of the palace, you pass by a final pool. This one shallow, overgrown, its surface broken by reeds. A few frogs blink at you, their throats puffing in slow rhythm. You don't need a clock to know what time it is. You're living it. Each step forward, each breath, each slow heartbeat. The palace no longer has a king, but it still keeps time, and tonight, so do you. The palace disappears behind you, its stone and shadow swallowed once more by the jungle. You follow a winding trail now, less a road and more a memory of one. Roots crack through the stones beneath your feet, and the foliage leans in close, as if trying to listen. The air has thickened with humidity. Even the moonlight feels damp. You're heading toward one of the smaller, lesser-known temples nestled beyond the main city walls. No tourists here, no floodlights, just darkness, trees, and a steady hum of insects keeping you company. Then, through the brush, a flicker of light. A single saffron-robed figure stands beneath an ancient archway holding a lantern. A monk, still here, still watching the water. You approach slowly, not wanting to startle him, but he's unfazed. Just nods once in greeting and steps aside as if he's been expecting you. No words, just the gesture. You step past him into the small temple, your sandals brushing over decades of incense ash and moss. Inside, it's simple. A single room, a central altar. And beside it, of course, a basin. Square, shallow, familiar. The drip continues from overhead, perfectly centered, echoing in the chamber like a heartbeat slowed for sleep. This isn't an artifact. It's a living thing. The monk moves to one side of the room, kneels on a woven mat and begins to chant. The cadence is soft, rhythmic, almost matching the drip, and you realize it's not just water that's marking time here, it's sound. Each phrase, each breath, each pause, another tick in the cosmic clock. Buddhist monks have long relied on water clocks and natural rhythms to structure their lives. Wake before dawn, meditate, chant, sweep, eat, rest, repeat. But unlike our frantic alarms and digital reminders, theirs are slow, felt, integrated. Time is not imposed, it emerges like mist off a pond. Historians have found records of temples using drip timers to regulate chanting cycles. Monks would recite a prayer with each drop or time their breath to the sound, allowing the ritual to unfold organically, without external countdowns. The result? A practice that was equal parts devotion and meditation. Quirky fact, some remote Cambodian monasteries even today use repurposed coconut shells and bamboo tubes as makeshift clepsydras. Fill one with water, poke a tiny hole, and it becomes a perfectly imperfect timer, dripping out rhythm, one drop at a time as monks chant or study by candlelight. You watch this monk now, alone in the ancient temple, his chant flowing like the water beside him. His voice rises and falls, never urgent, never forced. Just present. The bowl beside him fills slowly, no rush. When it reaches a certain point, he will stop. Not because of a bell, because the ritual says, this is the time. You sit near the opposite wall, quietly observing. The air is thick with sandalwood. You imagine what it was like centuries ago, when a whole team of monks occupied this space, each tending to their basin, their chant, their hour. This wasn't just religion, it was regulation, order, a life lived by water, sun, and repetition. Historians still argue whether monks had specialized roles, some to chant, some to time, others to reset the systems. There's little written evidence, but carvings suggest a kind of spiritual workforce. One group keeping the rhythm, another keeping the records, all part of an elegant machine of devotion. The monk's voice falters now. He pauses, stands. He picks up the bowl and carries it to a drain in the floor, gently pouring out the water. Then he returns, places the empty vessel back beneath the drip and settles again into silence. Reset. Just like that, the cycle begins again. You glance up at the shaft in the ceiling, open to the sky, letting in the moonlight. The light falls on the edge of the bowl, just barely. Tomorrow morning it'll fall squarely into the center. That will be another signal, another beginning. You wonder, how many centuries has this bowl been filled and emptied? How many monks have watched it, timed their breath by it, whispered mantras into its reflection, and how many more will? Outside, a soft wind rattles the leaves, a frog croaks, the jungle shifts, and somewhere, far off, another monk, maybe a mile away, maybe 100, is doing the same thing, sitting beside a basin, watching time fall in drops. This is how the Khmer temples still breathe, not in grand ceremonies or tourist foot traffic, but in these quiet rituals that refuse to die. Rituals so old they've slipped beneath the radar of most historians, preserved instead in practice. You're reminded of an old saying whispered by monks: the bowl never breaks, it only empties. It makes no logical sense, but somehow it feels true. You stand slowly, bow to the monk, and step back outside. He doesn't look up. The chant begins again. The temple behind you sinks into shadow, but the sound follows you for a few steps. Drip, whisper, silence. You've seen the monumental spires of Angkor Wat. You've felt the rhythm of the city, the swell of the berets, the dripping bowls in dark corridors. But here, in this small corner of the empire, a lone monk and his water bowl might be the clearest clock of all. The forest feels thicker now, as if every step forward is being gently resisted, not by hostility, but by age. You follow a narrow path that winds through bamboo groves and tangles of undergrowth, moving away from the soft chanting behind you and toward another kind of silence, a different silence, a European silence. Because tonight, you're about to meet the French, not the revolution ones, not the baguette ones. The early 20th century, khaki-wearing wide-hat explorers who descended on Angkor like moths to an overgrown lantern. And who, despite good intentions, wildly misunderstood what they were looking at. You emerge into a small clearing where the remains of scaffolding cling to the side of a weathered tower. The wood is rotting now, the nails rusted, but this was once the epicenter of a flurry of documentation, diagrams, and deeply confident guesses. The École Française d'Extrême-Orient, France's official archaeological arm, arrived in Cambodia in the early 1900s and immediately began mapping, photographing, and restoring the Angkor complex. Their work saved many temples from collapse. It also led to some spectacularly wrong assumptions. You duck into one of the buildings they studied, a modest structure with a rectangular pool at its centre. The walls are bare, the carvings minimal. It's clearly functional, practical, and the French labelled it as a bathhouse. Yes. They found dozens of these odd bowl-lined rooms with channels and depressions and said, obviously, a royal spa. Never mind that they were buried in sacred precincts. Never mind that some were aligned to celestial axes. Never mind that they had no drainage, just big wet tubs, right? Wrong. Modern scholars now suggest many of these bathhouses were actually timekeeping stations, ritual reservoirs, water clocks, calibration chambers. But the idea of a king sipping wine in a sunken tub with attendants fanning him was just too irresistible to let go. Quirky fact: in a set of early French field notes from 1911, a researcher excitedly records finding lavatories of exceptional elegance. A later study proved those lavatories were in fact sacred water chambers used during lunar festivals. Oops. You wander the chamber now, stepping carefully over cracked tiles and peeking into the shallow basin at its heart. It's dry now, of course, but the stone lip is carved with tiny tick marks, 33 of them. Too many for decoration, too few for tiles, just right for days. Historians still argue whether these marks represent a lunar cycle, a prayer sequence, or the number of chants recited before sunrise. But the precision, the care, it screams of function, not leisure. And then there's the matter of the holes. In the walls of many of these spa basins are evenly spaced punctures, thumb-sized, slanted downward. Early colonial records claimed they were for flower vases, to brighten up the king's bath. But a closer look reveals something else. Each hole is angled to catch light from above at very specific times. When the sun reaches a certain position, it hits the water surface through one of these apertures. The beam moves across the basin like a pointer. A moving hand. That's not a bath. That's a sun clock. You pass your fingers along one of the holes and feel the groove worn into the stone beneath it. Not by water, not by candles, by time. Because while the French were right about many things, symmetry, religious symbolism, materials, they often missed the most Khmer part of all. That time itself was embedded in everything. Not just the big structures, Not just the faces and spires, but the smallest bowl, the quietest chamber. And these colonial assumptions weren't just quaint. They shaped how Angkor was interpreted for decades. Water clocks were relegated to the fringe, ritual engineering dismissed as superstition, and sacred time just a local myth. But temples don't care what we name them, they just keep dripping. You step outside into the clearing again, and the moon has shifted. The grove is awash in pale silver, and the air smells faintly of wood smoke and rain. Somewhere nearby a nightbird calls once, twice, then falls silent. You follow a worn path where more of the French scaffolding lies abandoned. Metal beams, mouldy survey flags, a rusted pulley system. But just beyond the rubble is something unexpected. A stone platform with a narrow channel running through it. A trench, barely wide enough for your foot, with tiny carved notches along its edge. This, they guessed, was for drainage. But modern theories say it was likely a runoff timer. You'd pour water into one end and watch as it moves slowly down the trench, passing notch after notch. Each mark a moment, each trickle a signal. It's basically a sideways hourglass. Quirky detail. One Khmer restoration worker once told a visiting researcher that his grandfather used a similar trench system to time prayer candles. He'd pour water in, light the wick, and chant until the flow reached the last notch. Then, he said with a grin, the gods know I've done enough. You smile at that. Timing here is less about exactitude and more about rhythm, harmony, doing enough rather than on time. And now, the jungle seems to breathe around you. The temple fades, the scaffolding sags, but the groove in the stone, the notch in the bowl, the slant in the wall, still here, still marking time, despite the French, despite the labels, despite it all. You step away from the clearing and the rusting bones of colonial scaffolding, drawn back toward the heart of the jungle. The path narrows once again. It's slick with wet leaves, the air heavy with that thick pre-rain stillness. Somewhere high above, a bird gives a warning cry. You pause, waiting for thunder. But instead a breeze picks up, cool and sudden, and with it comes the sharp scent of moss, stone, and something less pleasant. Rot. You're approaching the forgotten side of Angkor, the part tourists don't post pictures of, the part where temples weren't preserved or restored, where water doesn't flow as it should, and where timekeeping failed, over and over again. Moss creeps over every ledge here, thick as frosting. Ivy clings to cracked walls and pools sit stagnant, choked with weeds and leaf litter. And in the middle of it all, a low structure barely distinguishable from the jungle itself. You duck through a broken doorway and enter. It's dark, quiet, and yet not. You hear water, not dripping gently like before, but splashing, gurgling, uneven. You follow the sound and find a basin, larger than the others but crooked, tilted. The water sloshes slightly to one side, not from movement but from age. The foundation beneath it has sunk. Whatever system this once was, it doesn't work anymore. Historians rarely highlight temples like this, the broken ones, the misaligned ones, but they're here, scattered throughout the Angkor complex like cautionary tales. Some believe these temples failed because the water clocks within them failed first, that misaligned timekeeping led to mistimed rituals, which led to spiritual disorder, which, in a worldview obsessed with harmony, could have meant disaster. Quirky legend. One overgrown temple, now little more than rubble, is known locally as the Hour Lost. Elders claim a festival held there once began too early, after a clock basin cracked and drained unnoticed overnight. The gods, they say, were not ready. A storm followed. The temple was abandoned soon after. You run your fingers along the cracked basin in front of you. It's filled with stagnant water, and a film of green algae blinks in the moonlight. The stone lip is chipped, and one side is propped up with what looks like a wedge of broken pottery. An ancient repair job, clumsy but earnest. Someone tried to fix it, tried to restore the rhythm. But time had moved on. You notice a channel leading away from the basin, now clogged with roots. It likely once fed a larger ritual pool outside, part of a system designed to overflow gently and trigger the next stage of a ceremony. But here, nothing flows anymore. The whole structure has become a shrine to misalignment, and yet it's still beautiful. There's something deeply human in its crookedness. You can almost see the monks shrugging, shaking their heads as they stir a puddle with a stick. The water's off, let's chant anyway. Historians still argue whether the decline of Angkor was driven in part by environmental mismanagement, deforestation, soil depletion, or overcomplicated water systems that eventually collapsed under their own precision. If true, temples like this would have been the canary in the sandstone mine, early warnings that the rhythm was breaking. You step outside into a small courtyard where a lotus pond once sat, now a shallow depression filled with brown leaves and a single, stubborn lily clinging to life. The carvings around the courtyard show signs of wear, but one stands out, a group of figures, heads bowed, hands raised, not in joy or victory but in apology. You wonder if they were meant to be supplicants, or caretakers who missed the signal. Above the carving, a strange mark, a long scratch, too deliberate to be random, perhaps a symbol of a clock hand, or a tally mark etched in frustration, or maybe just a monkey with a sharp rock. You smile despite the melancholy, because even here in failure the temple tells a story, one of impermanence, of slipping out of sync, of being human. Quirky detail. There are recorded instances of temple communities attempting to correct for failed clocks by guessing. One monk journal fragment describes listening to the frogs and trusting the air. Another speaks of reading the wind direction to determine whether it was near or far from midnight. You walk slowly now, back toward the trail, feeling the damp earth give slightly beneath your feet. The jungle presses close again, and for a while you hear nothing but the rustle of leaves and the chirp of crickets. Then, unexpectedly you hear it, a drip. Not from this broken temple, but from deeper in the forest, steady, predictable, a working clock. You follow it instinctively, as if your own rhythm has begun to recalibrate, as if even the broken basin taught you something. Maybe that's what timekeeping was always about for the Khmers. Not controlling time, but understanding how fragile the flow really is. One root, one crack, one misaligned bowl, and the whole song slips off beat. But that doesn't mean the music stops, it just changes tempo. And maybe, just maybe, the gods were fine with that. The drip you heard grows louder, not rushed, not hurried, just confident, like a heartbeat that never skipped. It leads you along a narrow stream now, barely a foot wide, cutting gently through the underbrush like a silvery ribbon. It weaves around tree roots and disappears under an old stone bridge. You cross, careful not to slip on the moss-slick steps, and pause midway to peer down. There below is the source, a steady outflow of water from the belly of a nearby shrine, feeding the stream one drop at a time. The channel is man-made, carved long ago with steady hands and sharp tools, and still, against all odds, it works. You smile. After the broken temple and its sleepy sense of melancholy, this is refreshing, reassuring, like meeting an old friend who's still on schedule. But just as you're soaking in this gentle miracle of consistency, the trees ahead shift. Something large is moving, you freeze, it's big, it's slow, it's very grey. An elephant. Well, that tracks. Because of course the Khmer temples weren't just filled with monks and kings, they were also filled, often literally, with elephants. And elephants, bless them, do not care about water clocks. They bathed where they wanted, drank when they felt like it, and frequently stomped through carefully engineered temple pools like oversized toddlers on a sugar high. Even now you can see the path this one has carved, a trail of cracked reeds and disturbed mud leading straight into one of the sacred ponds nearby. You follow, quietly. The elephant thankfully has wandered off, but its recent bath has left a scene of chaos. A partially drained basin, muddy footprints, and a few squashed lily pads floating like soggy confetti. This, you suspect, was not part of the ritual plan, and yet it kind of was. You see, while the Khmer engineers may have built water clocks with divine precision, they also built them with a certain realism. They knew the jungle wasn't a silent laboratory. It was full of interruptions, frogs, rain, birds, and yes, elephants. Mainstream scholars agree that the temples were designed with overflow basins, redundant channels, and rerouting features not just for seasonal storms, but for animals. Sacred structures, yes, but not inflexible ones. Still, elephants were a special case. Quirky fact: historical records describe entire temple ceremonies being paused because an elephant decided to nap in the central pool. One king reportedly declared this a sign from the heavens, and rescheduled his ritual. More likely, he just didn't want to make the elephant mad. You step around the pool, noting the places where stone edges have been worn smooth by years of animal visits. At first, you think it's damage, but then you realise it's accommodation. The channels curve wider here, the stairs are broader, like the builders expected a 4-ton guest to pop by for a drink now and then. There's even a legend that one of the smaller temples was constructed not to house monks, but to shelter royal elephants who were in training to follow temple schedules. You can imagine the scene, a novice handler patiently pointing to a water bowl and saying, "This means it's your bath hour." The elephant, unimpressed, flings a trunk full of mud in response. Historians still argue whether elephants were ever trained to follow time cues, or if the whole idea is temple lore that's gotten weirder over the centuries. But carvings show them everywhere, standing beside drip basins, carrying water pots, sometimes even wearing water vessels as decorations, and maybe that's the deeper point. Time here wasn't a strict overlord, it was a partner, a negotiation. The water told you what to do, but the elephant reminded you to chill. You kneel beside the pond and touch the water. It's murky, stirred up by the recent swim, but below the surface you see it, a submerged time marker, a carved stone line etched into the wall, half covered by silt now but still there. Elephant or no elephant, the temple remembers. You sit quietly for a moment, letting the sounds of the forest wash over you. The distant drip, the rustle of palms, a low trumpet somewhere far off, a sleepy bellow from the big creature, possibly annoyed that its bath was interrupted. You smile again. Because here's the truth. No matter how carefully the Khmer designed their clocks, nature had its own rhythm. And sometimes the jungle won. And when it did, they adapted. Quirky detail. Temple architects often included overflow chambers for water clocks that might get disrupted. These pause bowls, as they're sometimes called in restoration notes, were places where time could pool, literally, until things calmed down. Then the water would be redirected, the drip would resume, and the ritual could begin again. It's the ancient version of hitting snooze. You rise now, brushing your hands off on your legs, and take one last look at the muddied pool. A mess? Maybe. But a living one. The clock still works, just not quite on human terms. The elephant has disappeared into the trees. The water settles. Somewhere behind you, another drip resumes its rhythm, and you walk on, a little less concerned with being exactly on time. The forest opens slowly now, reluctantly, as if hesitant to let you through. Thick ferns give way to short grass, and ahead, an expanse of worn flagstone stretches out like a forgotten courtyard. It's quiet, eerily so, but not dead, just paused, like the entire world is holding its breath. You step forward, and your shadow follows. It stretches out ahead of you on the stone, long, soft-edged, gently quivering in the moonlight. You glance down, and for a moment, you feel something shift. Because now it's your shadow that's telling time. You remember the stories, how Khmer priests once read human shadows to measure time. You didn't need a clock if you had a body in the sun, or, as tonight proves, the moon. The idea was simple. Stand in a certain place at a certain hour, and your shadow would land exactly on a marker, etched into the floor, carved into a wall, or drawn faintly in chalk. You move further into the space and find the markers, faint lines, mostly worn away, etched into the flagstones beneath your feet. Some run east-west, others intersect at odd angles. A few still have symbols next to them, lotus petals, sunbursts, little dancing figures with their arms raised. The courtyard becomes a kind of dial, and you, standing in the centre, are its needle. It's an elegant idea, portable, organic. Khmer sundials didn't require gadgets or assistance, just presence, just patience. A moment spent aligning your feet with the stone, then watching your shadow stretch across centuries. Mainstream historians acknowledge the use of sundials in Khmer temples, though few survive in complete form. Most have been worn down by weather, misinterpreted as random scratches or outright stolen. But the logic is there, especially in temples with open courtyards like this, perfect arenas for dancing light and long shadows. And here's where it gets clever. These shadow clocks weren't static. Their orientation would shift slightly with each season, so to read them properly you had to know the land, the light, the angle of the solstice sun. Timekeeping wasn't separate from the world, it was the world. You take a slow step back, watching your shadow realign with a different line. Was this hour 2? 3? There's no legend to tell you, just the feeling that you've landed in someone else's schedule, one that hasn't ticked in hundreds of years. Quirky fact, in some temples, human shadows were used in place of gongs or bells. A priest might wait until his shadow crossed a particular marker before beginning a chant. It was seen as more harmonious, less intrusive than sound. The gods, it was believed, already knew what time it was. The people simply had to catch up. You wander to the edge of the courtyard and discover something stranger still. A set of footprints. Carved into the stone, toes pointed forward. They're too perfect to be natural. Someone etched them here, deliberately. A standing place, an instruction. You place your feet in the impressions. The fit is close. And when you do, something magical happens. The moonlight above aligns with a gap in the temple wall, and your shadow falls in a straight line, down the courtyard through a crack in a platform and onto a low altar at the far end. You don't breathe. It's not flashy, not dramatic, just precise. Quietly, devastatingly precise. This was a ritual alignment. Historians still argue whether these placements were meant for priests, kings, or symbolic figures. Was this a coronation line, a New Year's alignment, or a spiritual target? A moment when your shadow became divine? Nobody really knows, but standing here, you feel it. Not the answer, just the question, asked perfectly. And here's where things get even stranger. A few temples show signs of interactive sundials, where multiple people stood in different marked spots, their shadows converging at a central point. A ritual of reunion, perhaps, a cosmic clock built from human presence. Your body wasn't just telling time, it was part of time. You step off the footprints and pace the perimeter, counting the lines. Some are shallow, others deep. A few are broken by time or careless feet. But the rhythm is still visible, like music written in light and stone, and there's something deeply peaceful about it, because it reminds you time didn't need to shout, it didn't demand, it invited, and sometimes you accepted. You sit down at the edge of the altar where your shadow landed, letting your body rest. The stone is cool against your back. Overhead, the moon has shifted slightly. Your shadow moves with it, like a slow dance you're barely leading. You close your eyes for a moment and breathe. Here, in this open-air timekeeper, the ticking has stopped. Not because the clock is broken, but because you are the clock now. Quirky detail. Some Khmer myths tell of the shadow thief, a spirit who could steal your shadow if you stood in the wrong place at the wrong hour. Not to harm you, but to borrow your time. You'd feel it later. An hour gone, a memory lost, a yawn that came too early. Harmless, playful, just part of the balance. You smile, eyes still closed. If something steals your shadow tonight, let it. You'll take the nap, and when you open your eyes again, the courtyard is unchanged. The lines are still there, the stone's still cool, but your shadow has shifted, just slightly. Time has moved, and you, gently, have moved with it. You leave the courtyard quietly, retracing your steps with care, as if not to disturb your own shadow, now stretching behind you. The jungle, darker than before, presses in close once more. You duck under low branches, brush aside dangling vines, and descend a slope that feels steeper than expected. The path turns rocky, and the air grows heavy. Too still, like something has paused. Something has. This is where time stops. You reach a clearing at the edge of the forest. Not a temple this time, but a field. Flat, open, and eerily empty. Stones lie scattered across the ground, half sunk into the soil, once a complex, now a memory. No towers, no spires, just fragments. This, they say, is where the clock stopped ticking. Historians often describe the fall of Angkor in dramatic terms: invading armies, failed irrigation, climate change. But there's another version whispered by monks and elders, one where time simply ran out. You stand among the ruins and feel the absence. It's not loud, it doesn't wail, it just sits, like a held breath that never got released. You crouch beside one of the scattered stones. It's smooth on one side, carved on the other, barely legible now, but you can just make out a groove, a curve, a drip basin perhaps, or a time marker, but it's dry, and the lines etched into the surface don't go anywhere. They trail off into dirt. The channel has no end. You move slowly from stone to stone, piecing together a temple that once pulsed with measured life. You see what's missing now: the bowls, the spouts, the markers, the careful geometry, all collapsed, overgrown. The water stopped flowing, and when it did, the rhythm unravelled. Quirky fact: there are reports from early travellers, Portuguese, Chinese, Thai, who describe arriving in Angkor after its abandonment and finding shrines still upright but full of silence. Some said they saw birds nesting in the drip basins. One wrote of frogs croaking into empty halls, calling for a ritual that no one came to perform. It wasn't just physical decay, it was temporal collapse. You walk further into the field and find a wall, half-height, moss-covered. Along it, barely visible, are carvings of dancers frozen mid-step. Apsaras, arms arched, fingers poised. But without the rituals to animate them, they're just still images now. A clock with no pendulum. You run your hand along the stone. It crumbles a little beneath your touch. Not out of anger, just fatigue. And this is where the open debates begin. Historians still argue whether Angkor's timekeeping systems failed because of human neglect or natural chaos. Some believe deforestation led to irregular flooding, which overwhelmed the delicate water clocks. Others point to changing trade routes, shifting political centres, and prolonged droughts. Whatever the cause, the result was the same. The temple stopped keeping time, the ritual stopped syncing with the cosmos. The empire, not suddenly, not dramatically, began to fade. A whisper, not a scream. You find one last artifact, a partially buried pedestal, likely once part of a shrine. But atop it sits something odd. A basin, not carved from stone but clay. Cracked, lopsided, handmade, it looks rushed, last minute. Like someone at the end was still trying to keep time, even as the system collapsed, even as the jungle returned. You sit beside it. And for a long moment, you listen. Nothing. No drip, no chant, no rustle, just the sound of your own breath. This was the end of rhythm, the point where ceremony, calculation and calendar all failed. The moment the gods stopped receiving messages, or maybe the people stopped sending them. You look up at the stars. They haven't changed. They still keep time. The temples may have lost the beat, but the universe didn't miss a step. Quirky detail. There's a Khmer folktale that says when the last water clock of Angkor stopped, time itself curled into a ball and fell asleep beneath a banyan tree. It still sleeps, they say. That's why nothing moves too fast here anymore. You lie back against the stone, watching the stars overhead. They don't blink. They just burn. Silent. Perfect. And as you drift in thought, the story of Angkor's fall becomes softer. Not a collapse. Not a failure. Just a pause. A long, slow breath out. A temple's final tick. And now, here you are, resting in that breath. Hearing the quiet echo of 1,000 water clocks, all emptied now. All still, but not forgotten. Because even in this stillness, you can feel it. The memory of rhythm, waiting. You rise slowly from the field of silent stones, brushing moss and ancient dust from your clothes. The moon is higher now, nearly overhead, casting a pale glow across the broken basins and jagged outlines of what once was a carefully measured world. But there's no rush to leave. In fact, you realise you can't leave this place too quickly, because you've been inside the rhythm too long. The drip, the chant, the soft shuffle of bare feet down stone corridors. You've acclimated to temple time, so you walk, slowly, each step deliberate, reverent, as if your footfalls might crack the memory of the silence beneath them. You're heading back now toward one of the more intact complexes, a temple still standing, still breathing. The jungle gives way to a low stone wall, and beyond it, what appears to be a reflecting pool, still, undisturbed. But this one is different. You notice something as you approach, carvings along the edge, tiny ones smaller than usual, not the grand epics or cosmic calendars you've come to expect. These are simple, functional, lines, intervals, repeating. Each side of the pool is marked not decoratively, but like a measuring stick. The kind you'd use not to impress a god, but to check the depth of a stream, or to track the passing of time. This isn't a pool made for ceremony, it's a memory bank. It holds nothing now but stagnant water and a few nervous frogs. But you can tell this was a reference point. A way for priests or farmers or engineers to know what month it was, what stage the moon was in, or whether it was safe to plant rice. One temple, one pond, 1,000 memories, kept drop by drop. You sit at the edge, dipping your fingers in the water. It's cool and surprisingly clear. Below the surface, the carvings continue. More marks, more intervals. Each one part of a system someone once understood, maybe even memorized. Historians believe these carved pools were once linked. Each temple had its own, tuned to its region's specific rainfall, elevation, and ritual needs. Together they formed an empire-wide memory system, logging the seasons, the sacred days, and perhaps even the mood of the gods. You imagine a priest walking to this pool every morning, noting the level, then adding a stroke to a palm leaf scroll. Not writing the date, but watching it, listening to it, letting the water say what time it is. Quirky fact: one 13th century Khmer poem, recovered and translated only recently, refers to a pond as the temple's whisper, and says, "He who listens to the water hears the past." A lovely line, yes, but also oddly technical, considering that's exactly what these basins were designed to do. And now, here you are, listening. The frogs splash and settle. The moon casts shifting rings of light on the surface, and in the ripples, you begin to see not your reflection, but the reflection of time itself, bent, distorted, still moving. Because even in ruins, time leaves traces. You rise and follow a narrow walkway toward the temple entrance. The sandstone beneath your feet is slick but firm, and the walls to either side are covered in weathered carvings. One, in particular, catches your eye. A figure, seated. One hand raised, the other gently touching the surface of a shallow bowl. You stop. It's not dramatic. It's not even particularly well carved, but it feels familiar, like someone long ago tried to etch the exact moment you've been having all night. The act of watching time. You run your fingers along the carving. It's warm from the day's heat, still clinging to the stone, and you can't help but wonder, how many others paused here? How many others reached out and felt this same surface, drawn by the same quiet pull? This is the final truth of the Khmer temples. They didn't just track time, they remembered it. Not in numbers, not in hours or minutes, but in shape, in water, in shadow. Historians still debate how much of the temple system was designed as archive. Some believe timekeeping was just a side effect of religious planning. Others argue that water management and ritual calendars were the true spine of the empire, more than statues, more than kings. You lean against the wall and take in the silence one more time. It isn't empty. It's full of timelines, of prayers recited at dawn, of frogs croaking in rhythm with the moon, of monks bent over bowls that never boiled, of kings who waited patiently for the light to strike the lotus before they spoke. And somewhere in all that, this moment, yours. One more drop in a very old bowl. You leave the temple slowly, retracing your path along the mossy flagstones, past the pool with its etched intervals, back toward the outer wall where trees lean inward like curious onlookers. The jungle presses close again, but it feels softer now, familiar. You've reached the edge of your journey. The temples lie behind you, carved, crumbling, breathing, some filled with stillness, others dripping quietly into the dark. You've seen the working clocks, the broken ones, the frogs that stalled rituals, and the monks who never missed a drip. You've walked in sync with shadows, watched your body become a dial, and felt your breath fall into rhythm with a 1,000-year-old basin. Now you stand at the threshold, the place where the ancient ends and the world begins again. One last look back. The stones shimmer faintly under moonlight. The jungle hums. A single drop echoes through the distance. And somewhere, beneath it all, the system still ticks. Not loud, not proud, but persistently. A whisper of rhythm buried in earth and memory. This final temple, half swallowed by roots, is not marked on any modern map. It wasn't excavated, it wasn't restored, but someone long ago built it carefully. It doesn't reach for the sky like Angkor Wat. It doesn't wear the smiling masks of Bayon. It's smaller, squatter, but its core still holds something powerful, a single drip basin, still centered, still catching the sky. You kneel beside it. There's no carving here, no inscription, no lions, nagars, or gods, just water slowly collecting. The surface undisturbed, it reflects nothing but starlight. This one isn't meant to measure, it's meant to remember. You stare into it for a while, then gently you reach out and add a drop from your fingers from the air. From now. It joins the others. Quietly. Instantly. No splash. Just a soft ripple. An answer. And in that moment you realize the water clock isn't just a tool. It's a ritual. Every time it fills, the temple remembers. Every time it overflows, it lets go. This isn't about seconds or schedules. It's about presence. And now, it's time to sleep. The moon has begun its slow descent, slipping behind the tallest trees like a performer exiting the stage. The jungle hushes around you, its night chorus growing fainter, softer, frogs croaking from farther away, leaves barely rustling now. Even the insects seem to take a breath. The temples rest. You do too. No more walking, no more dripping. Just the gentle weight of everything you've seen, settling in your chest like warm water. The basins, the carvings, the monks whispering time from bowls that never ticked. The frogs that told the hour. The elephants who didn't care. The pools that measured shadows. The footprints carved for your feet. All of it now slowly dissolving into the stillness of your breath. And you realize it's okay that the clock stopped. They were never meant to run forever. They were meant to guide, to offer rhythm, to remind us how to listen, how to be still, how to let the water rise and fall without fear. So now let it fall. Let your breath lengthen. Let your shoulders soften. Let the rhythm go. There is no hour to catch, no ritual to miss, nothing left to count. Only the memory of a temple, waiting patiently in the jungle, listening to a single drop land in a stone bowl every few heartbeats. You are the silence between them. You are the shadow crossing the stone. You are the last sound the water makes before it rests, and now you rest too. Good night, 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 too.